Take a look at some of the brush options in Illustrator. Excuse me. So Illustrator has two brush tools. There's the regular brush tool, paintbrush tool, and then the blob brush tool. And I'll talk about both of those. First, let's look at the brush tool. If I simply select the brush tool right off the bat, I'm going to have this default calligraphic brush. So I'm using a Wacom tablet right now. This brush has no pressure sensitivity applied to it, but you can see it makes pretty nice a pretty nice stroke, or a pretty nice pattern and shape. Now let's look a little closer at what this brush is actually doing. When I'm drawing here, even though it looks like I'm creating a solid shape, it's actually just creating a path, a vector path, one that I can manipulate by using the direct selection tools and dragging these shapes and nodes around, or using something like the pen tool to change the shape of that path. Command Y get us back to there. And all this is really doing is sort of sweeping a shape along a vector. So let's double click on this brush that we're using. It says it's 5-point angled. So you can see the diameter set to 5 point, and it's got sort of a thinness applied to it. We can dramatically change that just to illustrate the point. Let's leave the strokes that are on there and start a new one. So now that I've changed that brush, you can see it's very thin now. So it's sort of, this is where it gets the name calligraphic, right? Because it feels like a calligraphy pen, that nib pen that you dip in ink, and it gives that sort of appearance. What it's missing, however, is the thick and thinness that you could have an advantage from with the Wacom tablet. So I'm going to go ahead and go back in here, and I'm going to say, for variation, rather than fixed, I want this to be pressure driven. And it's important, if you do want the pressure to change this variation to something close to the diameter. I usually just change it exactly the diameter. Leave the strokes that are on there. Now you can see what happens is I'm barely pressing with my brush. I get this really thin stroke, but the harder I press, the thicker it gets. So this allows you to be even closer to one of those calligraphic nibs, and in that you can really have some sensitivity and really have some control over the marks that you're making. All the while you're only making these little thin vectors, so file size wise it's not really taking up all that much room, because you're really just calculating a vector and then a pressure along that line. Other types of brush that you can use are art brushes. So let's look at this ribbon brush. So I'll just select the ribbon brush, and now if I draw with that, I'm actually creating that ribbon along the vector path that I've used. So Command Y again, just to illustrate this point, is simply creating a vector along that path. And then again you have more. This is another art brush. These are called art brushes because you're using a piece of artwork and sort of just expanding the artwork along that brush. And we can look at the settings of both of these brushes. If I look at this, double click on this brush and look at the settings, you can see this one's called the banner brush, and you have particular settings applied to each of these brushes. This one is actually a pattern brush, and it is repeating a simple pattern over and over and over, and it has different sort of settings here for corners and for edges, so that you can change the way this works. You can change the scale of the object. You could have this be pressure sensitive and go from this range to this range. So now when I draw with this, it's going to go from thin patterns to heavy patterns. So thin to heavy. So I'm changing the scale of the dots based on the way I draw and what I draw. I'll go ahead and delete all this stuff. So that's kind of an overview of the different types of brushes that you have available to you. One more here is the a bristle brush. And this one is trying to use, and you can see that I'm rotating my tablet pen, and you can see the angle of that nib changing, so that actually has an effect for the way it draws. So you can get a lot of variation and change simply by changing the rotation of your pen. I'm going to next go through how to create a simple art brush and how to create a scatter brush. Okay, so those are two different things. So I'm going to make a teardrop shape. I'm just going to start with a point. I'm going to make it go over here. This will be sort of a yin and yang sort of looking teardrop shape. Very simple shape, or maybe a balloon for a character. And let's fill it with blue. And let's give it a stroke of nothing. So we've just got this really simple shape. And I'm going to rotate this around so that it's facing to the right. And then I'm going to just simply go to my brushes palette and say new brush. And it's going to ask me what kind of brush do I want to create. I want to create an art brush. A brush that uses a piece of artwork. And this could be any piece of artwork. And you'll see the same settings here as we had with the banner. So stretch to fit stroke length, stretch between guides, scale proportionately. I'm just going to say keep it on stretch to fit stroke length. And keep it on its default method. You have different methods of tints and shades, which I'll go over in a moment. So right now, if I click off of this, select my brush tool, make sure I've got this brush selected, it's going to simply extrude that shape along the path that I draw, in the direction that I draw that path. So I can make it go this way, I can make it go that way, and you can see it's got some strange little things going on. So the shorter you make your line, and if you have something that goes back on itself like that, you're going to get odd shapes. If you want it to be perfect, you have to be careful to let go exactly at the end and not have any strange corners at the end. We can look a little closer at this to see what happened. So I've most likely got some sort of odd shape in here that's causing that to happen. So you can play around with your vector after you've drawn it, or you could use something like the smooth tool from the pencil options to go in and clean this up. So just because you aren't happy with what you see right off the bat doesn't mean you're stuck with that. You can always go back in and edit it because it's based on a vector. Okay? So that's how you create a simple art brush. I mean, and that could have been something like text. It could say art brush. And then I could make that text editable, create outlines from that text, and say new art brush. Okay, and now I'm drawing with the words art brush. Okay, so it's really, brushes can be really versatile and can do a number of interesting things. People would not be happy with you distorting type this way, but let's use the same thing we just used for the art brush and create a scatter brush. So like any of these you can drag out and see what the original piece of artwork was that they created this from. Okay, so those don't have anything because they're simple brushes. I can drag this banner out and look at the original banner that this was created from. I'm going to use my teardrop again. Let's make it a little smaller. And I'm going to say, again, new brush. Say scatter brush this time. And what this brush does is allows you to draw, and it simply duplicates that shape all over the place. So scattering it, in order to scatter it, you need to change the variation. So I want to scatter it from 100% one direction randomly and 100% the other direction, or roughly 100%. Close enough. Do I want this to rotate? Let's try not rotating right now. And size, let's have on pressure. Now you need to make sure that you change the variation of the size, like from how big to how big. And spacing, let's say we'll have that random as well, from 10 to 50%. And I'll hit OK. Now let's use that brush and see what happens. So I'm not getting a line, but you can see I'm getting a variation in size. I'm starting light and pressing hard. It's changing the size from small to bigger. And you can see that it's duplicating these shapes all over the place. So this could be nice if you wanted to create a flock of birds, or it could be snow or rain. Whatever sorts of things you wanted to create with that, you can do. Let's do some editing. And now you have this preview option. Since I've already drawn some things on my screen, I have this preview option, and I can change this down and see what it's going to look like. So I can change my scale size way down. I can change my spacing to be different. Maybe I want less spacing altogether. Maybe I want more scattering in each direction, or just in one direction. Maybe I want them all to scatter up from my brush. Do I want them to rotate? Let's have that be random as well. Rotate from what to what. Now they're going in all different directions. Completely random rotation. Then I can say, I'll go ahead and apply this to strokes. So any new strokes I make now are going to have those settings applied to them. And you can do things like change the way it's using color. You could say use tints, use hue shift. Let's select hue shift. I'll leave the strokes the way they were, but then I'm going to pick a new stroke color. Now we're using a brush, so stroke is what affects your color. So let's pick an orange, complement the blue in here a little bit. Okay, it's not doing much of anything, so I'm going to edit that to tints. Edit that to tints and shades. Okay, leave strokes. Now we're getting our orange. So tints and shades is going to use other color options that you choose. So if I chose like a purple. So scatter brushes can be nice and create some really sort of interesting effects. And again, we're simply drawing vector lines. Like this is what you've actually drawn, and this is what you get from it. So I'm going to stop here for this module. In the second brushes module, I'm going to cover creating your own calligraphic brushes, some settings for that, inking, so inking a drawing, and using the blob brush, the difference between the blob brush and the standard brush.